All right, Justin. So let's talk about Daredevil Season 3.
I love this idea.
I'm super happy to have you here and to be talking about this with you. And these episodes are not going to be super long. We're just going to go into some of the themes we see in the episode. Like we do, we're going to dig deeper. So That's what we're going to do. Quick recap first of episode 1 from The Defenders, which is also on Netflix. A building collapsed on Matt Murdock as he was Daredevil. And that was the season finale of The Defenders. He ends up recovering inside a Catholic church, so he makes his way to the Catholic church. It's very familiar to him because it's actually the church that he grew up going to. We're also introduced to FBI agent Ray Nadeem, who is struggling financially because he's been paying for his sister-in-law's cancer treatment. So he's a good dude. He's in a bad place. Foggy and Karen are mourning Matt, but they're also wondering if he could still be alive, especially Karen. And finally, the FBI keeps threatening Vanessa, so Wilson Fisk tries to negotiate a plea bargain with them, protecting her while giving up information to the feds. So just really quick, we've had season 1, we've had season 2. You and I have both watched those. We've also both watched The Defenders. Which is your favorite of all of those 4 seasons of television?
My favorite is Daredevil Season 1. I tend to be a really big fan of the origin stories, and I think they did that one so well. And it was also the first of this brand of the Marvel storytelling. So everything that has continued to characterize some of these shows, I got to see first there. So there was an episode early on where there was a very long shot in a hallway.
Yes.
And the fight just kept going.
Phenomenal.
And it was amazing. It was great choreography, great cinematography, fun storytelling. So for me, the first season is still the best, the Daredevil out of those. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Origin stories are great. Season 1 I thought was done really well. They went dark with it. Mm-hmm. They could have chosen not to go dark with it. They did. I like that.
Yep.
It's not in alignment with most of the rest of the MCU, which I also liked. It was different than the MCU, so I really liked that part of it.
But then ranking number 2, I'd say season 3 of Daredevil is my number 2 out of those 4.
I think I might prefer season 2. I really enjoyed the scenes between Punisher and Daredevil, though.
Yeah.
Those were really compelling. So I probably like season 2 a little bit better than season 3.
Cool.
But I think that the 3 seasons of Daredevil are superior to all of the other Marvel TV series content on Netflix.
Nice. And then just as a side note, because I don't even know if you know this, I used to be a Protestant Christian pastor.
Yeah.
Still do ministry and stuff, but am not currently involved in that, working in the entertainment industry. But one of my master's degrees is in spiritual formation and soul care. And so that focuses a lot on Catholic traditions.
Oh,
so
nice.
I have like a really deep appreciation for elements of the Catholic Church. So that still was never my background and my culture directly.
Yeah.
But with things like spiritual direction, I feel like one of the new characters, Maggie, serves as a spiritual director for Matt through, and so does the father.
Father Lantom?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are elements of this that I felt like are straight out of some of my experience.
At this point in history, I really struggle with labels related to faith because it's really hard to find any one particular label that I would feel comfortable calling myself.
Yeah.
So I've started calling myself a Christ follower,
Yep.
saying like, there's Jesus Christ, I follow Jesus Christ. That's going to mean I interpret things in certain ways that may not be consistent with Catholicism. It may not be consistent with Protestantism. It may not be consistent. I mean, like, there's just a wide array. But my mom's family is all Catholic. Fantastic people. My dad's family has always been Protestant. So I feel very connected to the Catholic Church and have some background in it. But not enough for some of the questions we're going to get into.
Right.
But maybe you do.
But
so
I
that's
mean,
perfect.
but also probably not. But,
right.
But then even that, you're talking about branding to a certain extent.
Totally.
Because there's no brand of the Christian faith that I stand 100% behind right now, aside from just aligning myself with Jesus. So calling myself a Christ follower, I can stand behind that, no problem.
Yeah.
But but that's a whole other conversation.
The first question I have on here it's kind of topic that I wanted to address, and I've got some pretty extensive notes, so maybe I'll just jump into it and you can respond to some of them. Episode 1 kicks off season 3 with Matt Murdock in hiding. A lot of people thought that he died at the end of the Defenders, and he's basically letting the world believe that he actually is in fact dead. He's also very bitter. And so my question is, what exactly is going on with Matt Murdock? And I'll throw out some ideas, and maybe you can respond to some of them.
Awesome.
I think that at the beginning of season 3, Matt has fallen into a pretty interesting trap, and one that I myself have fallen into as well. And I think it's really easy for any person of faith, whatever faith your faith is, to fall into this same trap. The first part of this is that he thinks he's been a servant of God. And when you ask the question of, okay, well, if he considers himself a servant of God, then what does he consider his servitude? What is he supposed to be doing? And I think he thinks that his job is to clean up Hell's Kitchen. I mean, if you look at Matt's backstory, this is not maybe surprising to us, because this is a guy who's had a horrific accident as a kid, totally lost his sight. But then he learns to use his other heightened senses. He becomes a hero, having done that. His father, though, is murdered for not losing a boxing match he was paid to lose.
Yep.
Right? So battling Jack Murdock dies that way because he's killed by the mob, essentially. And then he's trained by Stick, one of his mentors, to fight this bigger battle between the Chase and the Hand. And finally, he's being heavily influenced by the Catholic Church this entire time.
Yeah.
So I think that the natural way that the human brain works, because it responds to stories really well. This is why we do this podcast, because we're trying to figure out what's going on in the story and how do we understand and interpret the world based on this, right? The human brain is looking for all of these whys. Why did that happen? Why are things the way they are? We ask why all the time, and our brains inherently want to fill those spaces with reasons. And honestly, we'll actually even put false information in between those questions just to fill in the space.
Yeah.
So we'll go, oh, it must be that person acted that way because of this. And we'll put an intention on it because it helps us with our why.
Yep.
It may have been that they weren't even thinking, that they didn't even consider something, and they did it. And we go, oh, no, there must be intention there. I must have a why that happened.
Right.
So this happens a lot. Our brains are trying to make narratives. And I think that I can imagine Matt sitting back and saying, why did I go blind? Oh, yeah, okay, so I went blind. But why was I given heightened sense, though? Okay, why did my dad die? Why did Stick choose me and expose me to this bigger world of secret societies and things going on behind the scenes? And then, like, how does this fit into my Christian faith? And by the way, I'm going to use the terms Catholic and Christian pretty much interchangeably, and I think we should. There's no reason not to, but just so you guys know, it's not, none of them aren't confused by it for some reason. So I think it's sort of easy to see why Matt believes that he's been chosen by God to fight for Hell's Kitchen. Because if you ask yourself all of those questions and ask, are these things happening for a reason, you could easily jump to the conclusion that God ordained these events in Matt Murdock's life so that he would become Daredevil and help fight to clean up Hell's Kitchen. So the events of season 2 and then of Daredevil and then season 1 of the Defenders, I think Matt is left with more questions than answers. So the end result, I believe, is that Matt Murdock began to define a purpose for his life in terms of fighting crime in Hell's Kitchen. And then he equated that purpose with something that God gave him. So he's basically saying, my purpose is to fight crime in Hell's Kitchen. I got to where I am in life because God ordained it. Therefore, God wants me to fight crime in Hell's Kitchen. Now, there's one more step here that this is what the trap I think we all fall into. And this is where it gets really, really tricky. I think he expected God to reward him for obedience. So if his purpose is to fight crime in Hell's Kitchen, then if he does that, if he sacrifices his comfort, his livelihood, if he sacrifices even his physical body, his mental state, his emotions, then there's going to be a reward at the end of that equation. God calls me to this. I go do this. I get rewarded for this, right? I think that's why season 3 brings up the story of Job. So, biblical story of Job. Job is living rightly, but then tragedy basically falls on Job, and Job has all of these really bad things happen to him. Families dying, livestock's dying. So the whole world, Job's whole world is falling down around him.
Yeah.
But the entire time, Job is faithful to God, and he does question God, but he never turns his back on God. And so it shows up in this. Now, they're kind of assuming you know the story of Job, first of all. And there's a lot of nuance that I did not cover there. But Matt Murdock calls Job a pussy, right?
He does.
He does. And I think it's because he's basically looking at the story of Job and going, yeah, I see that's an example. But then Job didn't fight back.
Yeah.
So, God, you gave me a purpose. I sacrificed myself to achieve that purpose. I did not get the reward. And I only experienced tragedy doing what you asked me to do.
Yeah.
And in the same situation, Job then kind of went along with it. Well, then Job's stupid.
Yeah.
If he was as emotionally challenged as I am, he should have gone back at God, right? So I think that that's kind of what's going on in Matt, I should say. He's thinking he was obedient. I should be rewarded for this, but all I'm seeing is tragedy. I've lost Elektra now, who he was falling in love with. Elektra was doing strange things anyways. Hell's Kitchen is not that much better off than it was before.
Right.
And so he's left with this thing going, I did the work. I did all of the right things. Shouldn't I get the prize? But I don't have the prize. I'm no better off than where I started from.
And even worse off than he started with, because his hearing is gone. So there's that line early in the episode where he's saying, I can't see, which isn't new from an eye's point of view, but he's been able to see because of his hearing.
Yeah.
So he's in a worse place than he's ever been. He is broken physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah, exactly. And he's putting a lot of his identity into what he was capable of doing.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, I think that's going to set up a pretty central conflict as we get into further episodes with, as he's talking to Maggie or he's talking to Father Lantom, what perspectives are they trying to give him, and why is he fighting against that?
Yeah.
And he is going to fight with identity, I think, a lot in this series, because he's even doing it in episode 1. It's kind of like, am I Daredevil? Am I not Daredevil? Am I Matt Murdock? Am I not Matt Murdock? Like, who am I?
Yeah.
So we'll get into that a lot more. But what do you think about that?
I think you're exactly right about whether it was a reward specifically that he was expecting or just a different outcome. There is a disconnect now that instead of continuing on, because if God called him to this and equipped him for it, and if he did the right thing, there's a disconnect for him in what just happened and what is currently happening. And if you are of a faith that there is a meta-narrative, that there is something bigger going on, whether you would attribute that to God or the universe or whatever, that's probably one of the most challenging places to be in, where it's just, I don't get it. Totally. If I did the right thing, why isn't the good thing happening? And one of the more challenging questions to ask is just like, why isn't the good thing happening right now? Because it could happen later, and it'll be interesting to explore as the season goes on what will happen. And is this crisis of faith put to bed at all? Is it is this calm for him at all? I had a buddy when I was having just kind of, not nearly as intense of a crisis of faith, but just like, more or less like, hey, I'm trying to do the right thing. Why isn't this working? And he was just like, well, that's super narcissistic. Like your input and your contribution would be the thing that God needs. It's like, you're not that important. God's been doing his thing for
Right.
quite some time, you know?
Right.
And that was just an interesting place where I feel like Matt's struggling a little bit with that. Like, he's an incredibly special guy. He's got some incredible abilities. He's done some awesome good.
Right.
But then, yeah, like you're saying, struggling with the outcome, struggling with there is no reward. There's actually what feels like a punishment right now.
Yep.
Things are being taken away from him, people, abilities, status, all this stuff, and he's left in the basement of a church, which I feel like is just really
Yeah.
cool visually, because it's like at a low place,
Yeah,
right? And at a place that people aren't meant to live.
Yep.
And he's in hiding. He's in a lot of physical darkness in
Yes.
addition to the mental and emotional and spiritual darkness. And it's like familiar but different, because you can hear the singing sometimes. He's around familiar people, but he's rejecting it. It's so much more cold. It's not the warmth of a cathedral or something.
Right.
It's barren and cold and dark and lonely. And so there's just some great visuals of here's where Matt is physically and as a character, you know?
It fits with the narrative really well. And I think if we compare where he was in season 2, he was fighting this really intense battle with the Punisher as it came down to two worldviews.
Yeah.
The Punisher's worldview is you do the thing to get the results no matter what. Your morals don't matter.
Right.
It's the end result that matters, right? And Matt Murdock was like, no, I'm not doing that. There are standards I must adhere to if I want to achieve that result. And I think that it's a really cool place if you place the entire narrative arc over season 1 and then season 2 into season 3.
Yeah.
And of course the Defenders season 1 as well in there. It's a really good movement along that line, because he's basically saying to the Punisher, well, I'm the righteous one here.
Yep.
So the problem is if you do what you're going to do, that equals really bad things later on down the road. But if you do it the way I do it, it equals really good things down the road. And yet there's no good things going on for him right now.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting place for him to start out.
Yeah, and like you were talking about with him deciding, am I Matt Murdock? Am I the Daredevil? To be an armchair psychologist for a moment, that is an idea of splitting. It's like having a hard time having a cohesive story of who someone is in their good and in their bad, but needing to say, I'm all good or I'm all bad, and having very little gray. And so right now, Matt's not able to live with the tension of these two elements of him.
Yeah.
And you know, another thing that I'm curious how that'll play out for the rest of the season.
Totally.
Well, one thing that I was just thinking about was that this demonstrates the importance of having hope and purpose, because for all of us, to have a sense that we do matter, and that we are a part of something bigger. And I think that depending on where we put that hope, it can bring us down. So if Matt was putting his hope in his hearing something you can lose.
Yeah.
And so that's a really tricky thing to put your hope and your purpose in. But when we see him now without hope, without purpose, it's such a low place. And I forget which podcast we were talking about a similar theme, where it's just like so many people live without hope and without purpose.
Yes.
And that's just not... Bird Box.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
There are some very hopeless elements of that movie.
That's right.
But just how important that is, to all of us.
Yeah. The thing that I really responded to well at this episode is that I felt like there are a lot of people who don't have any faith at all. But for those of us who do have faith, doubt is one of the biggest struggles that we'll face, because there are things that come up in life. You talked about talking to your friend who told you, like, well, what do you think was so narcissistic that this would be different? I had the exact same experience when my mom passed away in 2012 from breast cancer that had metastasized everywhere, and one of the places it had gone was her brain. And I remember thinking in the hospice, like the last week of her life, I remember thinking like, this isn't how God's people are supposed to die.
Right.
Like they're supposed to go easily. They're supposed to have the story of like that, you hear all these people tell these stories of like, oh, well, we were all gathered around and then everything seemed so at peace and then they died. Right.
Yeah.
And it was like, it wasn't like that at all. It was horrific the entire way through. And what I realized was that I had a narrative that Matt Murdock had that was, I thought I was doing the right things. Not even that I was like so righteous by doing things, but that I was just even saying I'm a Christ follower means that my family members will have nice deaths.
Right.
Well, that's a false narrative that I've been telling myself. That's not true. I had to, and so when you're faced with that, you then do have this second where you go, and it does come down to a narcissism type of a thing. That why would I be so much better than everyone else? Why would God care about me even more so than he cares about the people that don't choose to follow him?
Yeah.
He cares about them just as much as he cares about me. Yeah. So why would I have some different experience than they would have?
Yeah. And we live in a weird place. So just like going into the Christian narrative for a second and some of the things that I believe. So when you said, this isn't how it's supposed to go with your mom passing, I'd say, absolutely. That's not how it's supposed to go. Right. And that's a whole other conversation.
Exactly.
But it's like, so we live in a weird place where we need to lean into that doubt and into that tension of what is going on.
Yeah.
And so when I love when characters go through these, especially when heroes go through these, because it makes it, I don't know, it connects it to our experience, because we all go through doubt. We all go through, I don't get this. I don't know what to do next. And so I'm excited to see where Matt goes with this, because when he's putting forward all these problems, I'm like, cool, man, lean into that, right. Explore that. So, because, in a perfect world, his righteous actions would only reap good rewards,
exactly.
But that's not the world of Hell's Kitchen. So I'm curious what the creators of this show will do with that idea.
Yes, absolutely. By the way, I should say this too. It's interesting the narratives that we put in our mind. Some of the narratives that we put in our mind don't even come from the stories. Remember I talked about earlier, like how the brain wants to put whys in place?
Yeah.
I think that one of the more damaging narratives that we can have as people of faith, any faith, is if I do good, I get good.
Yeah.
Now, there may be some truth to that too. If you're a responsible person, not an irresponsible person, chances are it'll be better for you to be responsible. But there are some narratives that, I mean, even if you were to take the Bible as a narrative, right? And you look at some of the great heroes of the Bible, great characters of the Bible. Some of the people that the Bible is revering as really strong characters died horrific deaths. Yeah. So why would I get in my mind that wasn't going to happen to people I love?
Right.
I'm giving myself different narratives based on how I want to feel, not how the world actually plays itself out.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing, I think, that we can always test. And doubt is one of the best ways to actually test faith.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, been going on for that one for a long time. Really quick before we go, because I just want to get a real quick take on this. So setting up the plot, we've got Wilson Fisk, who's been in prison. He wants to get back with Vanessa. We've got an FBI agent, Ray Nadeem, who's struggling with money, has a really cool family. Foggy's this big corporate lawyer. Karen Page seems to be having a crisis of her own. So what is going on here, Justin? Like, is this a compelling setup, and what are they trying to set up?
Yeah, part of it I'm interested to see, because it's like, Agent Nadeem, who's this guy? We get a lot of the, right. Tension of finances, and it's like, how relatable is that to every single person that watches the show? And, illness in the family, and just trying to do the best you can. So he's like a super easy character to connect with, and going and talking to his boss, and why am I not getting this raise? And it's like, I've had that conversation. I'm curious where we'll go with that. And he seems to be all of a sudden a very pivotal character, because Fisk says to him, I want to make a deal. So it's just like he's going to be he's the guy that is getting Fisk to fess up, or to deal or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes for him. Karen's in an interesting place because I still don't know whether I think she has like an intuition that Matt's alive or if she's just refusing to grieve. I'm kind of
that could be
torn.
It for sure. Yeah.
But she is paying his bills, keeping stuff organized, waiting for him to come back.
Yeah.
And I think I am more, even though as the viewer I know that Matt's alive, when I'm looking at it from the outside point of view, I think I'm more in line with Foggy, where he's like, you can't do this.
You can't do this, yeah.
We have to move on.
Right.
And so it's cool to see that Foggy's doing well. Fisk is still, I think, one of the most compelling villains that the MCU has put out. He's just incredibly fascinating and super violent and horrifying. And then we should also talk about just like the difference between Fisk in Daredevil versus Into the Spider-Verse, because he's got different motivations and all of that, but pretty consistent with the character. So I think it's a great setup for a new season, because it's not wiping the board clean. It's not like, and now this person's doing something totally different. It feels very in step with where those characters would be after the events of the Defenders. And yeah, I am excited to see where all of their journeys take them.
Yeah. It's interesting because you just talked about hope and purpose.
Yeah.
And Matt doesn't have that, right? What I found really fascinating is as I looked at each character in context to where the story is at, where they start out in episode 1, literally all of them are not fulfilling what they believe their purpose to be.
Huh.
So if you look at it, you look at Karen already took down Fisk, which was her overriding purpose, was to take him down through journalism or otherwise, right? Foggy, he really feels like his purpose is to help the people who can't help themselves and can't get the legal help that someone like Fisk could get. But he's working for this giant corporation, right? So Karen feels lost. Foggy feels lost. Nadeem wants the promotion but can't get it, and they won't. And he's really kind of getting upset about that and looking for a way to get it.
Yeah.
Fisk even is like, my purpose is to be with the woman that I love, but even that is being barred from me. Now, he has a side purpose. He wants to deconstruct Hell's Kitchen and build it back up. Right. But Vanessa is his predominant thing. So you have all these people who, every single character that I think we're seeing here is off purpose.
Yeah. And then if we can take the last moments of this first episode, and just like make some educated guesses, it looks like Fisk is going to get out of jail. It looks like even one of their check marks of we had a purpose and we accomplished it is about to be undone.
Totally.
So that puts everyone even more off kilter and everything.
Which is really cool setup. So I would say this is a great setup. And Justin and I are going to keep getting into this a little bit more on future episodes, which would be really fun. Love to hear your thoughts as well. So make sure you comment wherever you're at. And as we always say, question everything in your favorite geek stories.
And always seek the truth.